welcome everyone. I am Brian McCall, Editor-in-Chief of Catholic Family News, and happy to introduce you today and have a conversation with author George Neumayr, who, as many of you know, has published many articles and books. He was, for a long time, was the editor at the American Spectator, has published, again, innumerable books. Many of our viewers are familiar with his book, The Political Pope, which we've talked about on our programs. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So maybe we could
Thanks for having me.
Great. Maybe we just begin with The Political Pope. You wrote that some time ago. It was published in 2017. And again, it is still available. And as I've done in our newspaper, really highly recommend this book to our readers to understand an important dimension of what's going on in the Vatican. It really makes sense and helps us to see why some things have been happening due to the really interesting research that you've done. So maybe if you can, for those maybe who haven't yet read the book, tell us a little bit about the premise of the book and what its main focus is.
Sure. Yeah, it's an unabashedly contrarian look at Pope Francis and his pontificate. I felt that there was a need for a book of that kind. It was the first book of that kind. Several other books came out after my book appeared. The Dictator Pope being one of that was a very, very good book that came out after my book, and looked at aspects of the pontificate, of the Francis pontificate my book was focused mainly on what he's said and done. Mm-hmm. I wanted to basically show that, his pontificate is a very consequential one, and it represented a substantial departure from that of his two previous predecessors. I was sort of highlighting the discontinuity between his pontificate and Pope John Paul II and Benedict's pontificate.
I guess on that,
but I also went into his past as Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and I kind of sketch his ascent in the church, and I show how he is really the product, the culmination of 100 years or more of modernism that had been building up in the church, and that his pontificate is really sort of the concrete epitome of the sort of spirit of Vatican II, and that he represents the kind of modernism that Vatican II was seeking to push. And so that's a little bit about that book. But I also, with respect to the subject of our conversation, I also look at in that book, I look at the unholy alliance between the global left and the Vatican under Pope Francis, and in particular the Democratic Party, the unholy alliance between the Democratic Party and the Vatican, which we're now seeing unfold right before our very eyes, with Joe Biden, as yeah.
So obviously it's a book that would differ significantly, say, from the biography that Austin Ivory has written, for example. You're right, definitely a very harder look at what's going on. But before we get to Biden, if I might ask you to clarify, you're not so much critical of the fact that the Pope is speaking about political matters or politics, I would assume, because after all, John Paul II had much to say about Soviet communism, for example, and denouncing it. So what is it exactly that you see that's wrong or troubling about Jorge Bergoglio, later Pope Francis's kind of involvement in politics?
Well, I see his involvement in politics as a form of left-wing clericalism. He's extending the authority of the church to political issues beyond that authority. He's applying it to prudential political matters. I have no problem with a pope weighing in on the non-negotiable natural law-related issues that pop up in politics. That's the church should, of course, do that. The church should speak up for the natural moral law in politics, but that's not what we're seeing under this pope. He's silent on the natural moral law issues, while being very voluble on highly prudential political matters that the authority of the church doesn't apply to. And these are matters on which Catholics should be able to disagree reasonably. So his left-wing clericalism, instead of uniting the church, it has divided the church. It's divided Catholics on issues where there really isn't a true Catholic position. And meanwhile, those issues where there is a true Catholic position, such as a gay marriage and transgenderism and abortion and issues related to the natural moral law, all we get is silence from the Vatican, or we get somewhat subversive statements from the Vatican.
Yes.
So it's a condemnation not of the church's presence in politics. That's obviously absolutely necessary in order to uphold the moral order within society. The problem is that the authority is misapplied, and it becomes a form of left-wing clericalism, which just ends up serving the interests of one party in our politics, namely the Democratic Party.
So let's turn to that, because obviously since you published your book in 2017, we saw most recently a bitter election struggle between President Donald Trump and an increasingly socialist-leaning Democratic Party under Joe Biden, who has occupied the office of the president for about a little over a week now. And so do you think that the connections you discussed in your book between the Democratic Party and a little bit the Obama administration have deepened on this era of Joe Biden, or have in different ways?
Oh yeah, I see the Biden presidency is really intensifying that unholy alliance between Pope Francis's Vatican and the global left. In fact, the Pope tweeted out an exact slogan from the Biden campaign: "Build Back Better." The Pope tweeted out "Build Back Better," which came from Joe Biden, and that just sort of underscored the unity between Biden and Pope Francis, and it shows that they're going to use their power to push the world in the direction of what global elites have called the Great Reset, which is really just a euphemism for the revival of global socialism. And it's very concerning to me that we have a nominally Catholic president and kind of a nominally Catholic Pope leading the world to the left under the guise of Catholic social justice, and Catholic social justice has just become a euphemism for socialism, and betrays the tradition of Pope Leo XIII, which recognized the value of capitalism and the dangers of socialism.
Yes, and we've talked about in our program several times, the only system that the popes such as Leo XIII, Pius XI condemned wholesale was not capitalism. Again, the popes had certain critiques of aspects of it, but was socialist communism. Is the only system the popes have ever said it just is inherently irredeemable and cannot be supported. Whereas again, capitalism or free market, whatever you want to call it, again, may have flaws or things that need correction, but has never been condemned in the way communism has. So it's interesting. I know you bring out the Build Back Better, which, as you're right, was a motto of Joe Biden. It's also a motto of the World Economic Forum that is involved in the Great Reset, mentioned by Pope Francis. But you don't just say sort of allied to the Democratic Party. I notice you use the term the global left more broadly. So to what extent is the Chinese Communist Party part of this unholy alliance, would you say?
Well, the global left has great sympathy for communist China, and the Vatican, of course, the leftists at the Vatican, such as Bishop Serrano, have really shown their hand on that. Serrano said that the greatest implementer of Catholic social justice in the world today is from China. And Saranda is an Argentinian who's very close to Pope Francis, and I arguably reflects his thinking pretty accurately. So I mean, there's no question that the global left, of which Francis and Biden are representatives, is willing to cut communist China a lot of slack. One of the things I pointed out in my book on Joe Biden recently is that he's a supporter of China's one child policy, or now it's a two-child policy. But yes, at the time when he was over in communist China during the years, Biden said that he fully understood China's eugenics policy, and so there's a sympathy to the left that extends not only to the economics of communist China, but also to the morality of communist China. And I think we're going to see, unfortunately, under that this global reset, great reset, will be very partial to the economics of China, while saying nothing about the brutality and immorality of communist China.
So you mentioned in the beginning talking about, there are certain non-negotiable principles of natural law that are kind of, nothing to talk about, and the Pope is to remind people of those. But then there are areas of practical prudence, political prudence. And one of those that's obviously been in people's minds the past year has been, how do you respond to a new virus, a new, coronavirus that has changed the world a lot. To what extent have you seen Pope Francis and the Vatican sort of unduly falling in line behind or supporting the sort of concerning reactions of the global left to the China virus, although it's not a politically correct term to use these days, I guess?
I didn't catch the last part of what you said. I'm sorry.
Oh, that was just trying to make a joke on my part. I said the China virus, but that's not politically correct to say these days.
Okay. Well, yeah, if I understood your question correctly, is very uncritical when it comes to global UN-related institutions. Mm-hmm. And so everything that comes out of the World Health Organization, the Vatican swallows completely and never questions, and we're seeing with the distribution of the vaccine that this Pope is not only casting the use of the vaccine as morally acceptable, he's also presenting it as a duty, saying yes, that it's morally obligatory. That if you don't take the vaccine, then you're exposing your people around you to harm, and I find that to be really outrageous. I mean, it's one thing, I know that theologians disagree on whether or not the evil involved in using the vaccine is proximate or remote, and I don't, I'm open to those various arguments, but to cast it as a morally obligatory yes, act is really an abuse of the Vatican, of the Pope's authority, in my view.
Mm. No, very true. I mean, your point that there has been this disagreement indicates this is an area of prudence where you can't say you have a duty, right? If theologians are differing on whether it's permissible, there's certainly no way to say there's a moral duty to do something that is morally uncertain. So that's a very good point. So in what other areas or what other evidence, I think, do you have of cooperation with the Biden agenda or the Biden push towards socialism?
Well, one of the big issues, where the Vatican and the Biden administration are going to come together is climate change, climate change activists. And, it's very clear that the Vatican, considers that to be, one of the great issues of our time. And Biden is making that the centerpiece, really. He's making that the centerpiece of his administration. He's yes, made John Kerry a global envoy on climate change issues. Gina McCarthy is the domestic, I think, head of his climate change efforts. And Gina McCarthy, if you remember, she went to the Vatican during the Obama years, and she was shown around by the Vatican officials. They showed her the solar panels at the Vatican, and they talked to her about climate change. And she made a very revealing remark while she was there. She said, the Pope is great on this issue because he can depoliticize the issue for us. So in other words, he's a great propaganda tool for climate change. He can persuade all the religious people in the world to see that there's only one side to that issue. And so I think what we're going to see under Gina McCarthy and John Kerry and all these other climate change officials under Biden, they're going to maximize the propaganda value of the Vatican for the advancement of climate change activism. And that we're going to be bombarded with messages from the Vatican that climate change activism is not a prudential political matter, but a religious and moral issue, which requires one that the religious take one stance on, and that's a complete misrepresentation of the issue. The authority of the church does not extend to climate change activism. It does not exchange to a matter as contingent and debatable as the scientific issues involved, and then the political response to the scientific issues involved. I mean, these are highly prudential matters, and the church should not be bullying Catholics into taking one position on this question.
I guess another similar issue is the issue of immigration. And that's where it's interesting, because the global left has kind of got itself tied up in knots a little bit, which is funny to watch, because they've been pushing, and Biden pushing, open border, mass migration, immigration, no border security. But now with the pandemic, they're sort of caught in this mess that clearly is something, if you really have a deadly disease that spreads disease rapidly. So they're kind of not really sure what to do about it. But is that, again, another one where you see it's really not the role of the Pope or the Church to be kind of making obligatory statements about whether countries should be letting and to what extent new people enter a country?
Oh yeah, it's absurd to think that the exact configurations of immigration policy would constitute a matter on which the church, could speak for all Catholics. That's an absurd position for the church, for Pope Francis to take, and for all these bishops to take. I mean, even the semi-conservative bishops, they all just sort of take it for granted that the quote-unquote Catholic position on illegal immigration is in favor of amnesty and not in favor of enforcing immigration law. And that's left-wing clericalism to the hilt. That's the essence of left-wing clericalism, to take a prudential matter like that and say, oh, the church just has one position as a teaching on this, which all Catholics are obligated to observe. And one of the I think points of unity between the Pope and Biden is, I think they both see illegal immigration or amnesty as a kind of form of socialism by other means. It's really wrapped up in their social outlook. They think that a borderless world is necessary in order for wealth to be redistributed equally. That you can't accomplish the equal distribution of wealth unless borders are open, unless poorer nations can enter wealthier nations and take that wealth. So I think what we're, just as climate change represents socialism by other means, I think this whole amnesty push represents socialism by other means, and you can even see that in some of the rhetoric that is coming from Joe Biden's spokeswoman. She referred to his executive order declaring that for the first 100 days of his administration, no deportations will take place. She said that was about equity. That was
Yes.
That was part of the equity of the Biden administration. So I think that underpinning all of these specific issues is a shared socialism, a socialism that is shared by Joe Biden and Pope Francis. In fact, Biden, has openly endorsed the socialist rationale for taxation. He said that the purpose of taxation is to spread the wealth around. He didn't say that the purpose of taxation is to finance the legitimate needs of the government. That's the traditional rationale for taxation. But he said, no, it's to spread the wealth around. And that, of course, is Pope Francis's view as well.
Oh, yeah. Going back to Evangelium Gaudium, he talked about wealth redistribution as the goal, which the church has always taught. Pure wealth redistribution is immoral because it's against justice, because it violates the seventh commandment. Obviously, redistributing in the sense, if someone steals something from you, making them give it back is justice. But to just say you are wealthy, therefore you have to give back, has never been the history of the church. Likewise, in my research on the 2,000-year history of what the church has taught on law and justice, never before really the last few years has the church ever said part of justice is you have a right to live anywhere on the planet you choose. Never been anything the church has said. So again, really, really strong points. On my own view, is a little cynical. I think you're right. It's to push socialism, but I also think there's a more cynical, practical side to it. I think both Biden and church officials see kind of illegal immigration as a way to boost their numbers, right? The Democratic Party thinks, well, if we let them all come in and say, we're the ones that let you in, they'll vote for them. And the church that's crumbling, that, pews are empty, people are leaving the church, sees it as a way to fill pews. Again, well, let's just bring these people in and then we'll hide the decline that's going on. So I don't know if I'm too cynical, but I do see that commonality.
There is an element of it looks like they're papering over their failures at evangelization by filling the pews with illegal immigrants. To go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is what should the church's role be in politics? It really goes to me. It goes back to what Jesus Christ said, which is render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's. So and the irony is that the modern church does not render unto Caesar what is Caesar. The enforcement of borders certainly falls within the authority of Caesar. And yet here's the church saying that Caesar is wrong to enforce borders. Meanwhile, when Caesar is wrong, truly wrong, such as on abortion, in the paying for abortions or protecting abortion or promoting gay marriage, whatever, the church is not rendering unto God what is God's. It's silent, largely silent, and it's not giving Caesar a hard time about the things that truly are in violation of Caesar's authority. So I just find that there's a sort of everything has been turned on its head. That doctrine has been relativized, and prudential political matters have been absolutized by the modern church. So it takes a pretty strict stance on illegal everybody has to believe in amnesty, but then it tends to be very agnostic about contraceptives. And it doesn't really. The church doesn't really present her teaching on contraceptive with any consistency or rigor, and has completely waved the white flag, in the culture war on that. I think the reason that the Supiches and the Tobins and people like that, the reason they don't care about Biden's contraceptive mandate being reimposed on Catholics is that they don't care about contraception. They don't care about the church's teaching on contraception. So that's why that's why they rebuked Archbishop Gomez for criticizing Biden on Inauguration Day. They don't have any, they don't want Biden's heretical Catholicism criticized because they share much of that heretical Catholicism. To them, Joe Biden is a good Catholic. His reduction of Catholicism to left-wing politics and modernist theology is exactly the project that they've been promoting for decades. And so in many ways, he represents, Biden represents the completion of their modernist project for public life.
It's interesting because in one of Archbishop Vigano's interventions, he talks about the Land O'Lakes statement of the Catholic universities to break free of the church. And he sort of says a Biden presidency and those who vote for him is a product of the past decade since then, since 1968, of Catholic, particularly higher education, kind of pushing or educating people towards exactly what you're saying, relativizing doctrine, but absolutizing left-wing politics. So we're really seeing, according to the Archbishop Vigano observations, the fruits of decades of kind of this concerted effort. So that's interesting to see a similar note with what you're saying. So one area where the church certainly does have authority is to uphold her own law and disciplines with respect to the sacraments. So I assume I'm sure you're aware, the morning of the inauguration, Joe Biden apparently went to church in Washington, D.C. and presented himself and received communion. Could something like this be going on without the Pope making clear, either in a wink and a nod or directly, that he is to be admitted to the sacraments and be permitted contrary to church law?
Oh yeah, I think the policy of the American bishops reflects the Pope's policy. I mean, he gives communion to pro-abortion Italian Catholic politicians, and while Pope Francis was in the United States during the Obama administration, he didn't say a word about the problem of pro-abortion Catholic politicians. In fact, Vigano, I believe, raised that issue with him at a dinner, and he said the Pope just sort of faded away, or just sort of his, he didn't respond. He was mute, and so yeah, it's pretty clear that the sort of problem we've been dealing with for decades, ever since the days of Mario Cuomo, the bad Catholic politician, the pro-abortion Catholic politician. I mean, that really is the product of all these decades of modernism and secularization within the church. The faithlessness of Joe Biden reflects the faithlessness of the bishops. They gave up on the faith, many decades ago, and he's really the product of that liberalized, politicized, modernized Catholicism. And I think they, in a way, they kind of like he's in a position of power to kind of do to the traditional Catholics what they would kind of like to do themselves. They don't mind they don't mind seeing traditional Catholics persecuted by a Biden administration, because they don't like them either. They see those people as deplorables too. And so I think this whole class of pro-abortion Catholic politicians, it's just one. It's another facet of the modernist problem that we've been dealing with for 50 years or more.
Well, it actually reminds me of another insight Archbishop Vigano has given us from some of his writings during the campaign, which he says at one point, I forget which it is, I think his letter to Catholics about Biden, American Catholics. He says he sees increasing the Pope pushing Orthodox Catholics by doing outrageous things like calling for the civil unions in his Francesco video, that he thinks he's doing this to sort of force those Catholics to make a break, to eventually stand up and say, wait, this is wrong, I can't take this, so as to then actually bring in the other sword of the deep state, the global left, to persecute them, because they can then say, well, you have to do these immoral things or support them. And when they say, well, I can't, it's against my religion, say, well, you've been sort of pushed out of your church because you're schismatic, because et cetera, that there may be sort of a baiting going on, cooperating between the Pope and to sort of flush out. Now, Archbishop Vigano doesn't use the word flush out, but between the lines, that's what I read, to kind of flush out more Orthodox conservative Catholics. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think that, there is something like that going on, because you see the eagerness with which the Catholic left is willing to declare Orthodox Catholics to be heterodox. Basically we're in a situation where the new orthodoxy is heterodoxy, and those Catholics who don't subscribe to that heterodoxy are described by the Catholic left as bad Catholics. And they in recent weeks, of course, they've been trying to use the Capitol Hill riot, they're trying to use that to discredit and silence Orthodox Catholics who had absolutely nothing to do with the riot, of course. But James Martin, Father James Martin, the Jesuit, was willing to say, well, all those, this wouldn't have happened without all that conservative Catholic support for Trump, and they're really, these conservative Catholics are responsible for what happened on Capitol Hill, and it's really just an effort to drive Orthodox Catholics out of the church and allow the James Martin types to monopolize the church and to clear, they want to be able to declare victory and say, our Catholicism represents the only acceptable Catholicism, and people like Vigano are heretics and they're outside of the church, so yeah, I think that a lot of this subversive messaging by the Vatican probably is designed to kind of make life as uncomfortable as possible for Orthodox Catholics and put them in a position where they take actions that the Catholic left media can portray as schismatic or apostasy of some kind. But it's really, this is, the bottom line is that the new orthodoxy is heterodoxy, and from it, these, the crowd around Pope Francis will try and cast you as the problem. You're the source of division in the church. You're the unfaithful Catholic, and there's obviously an increasing, the ultramontanism where, orthodoxy is increasingly defined by whether or not you accept the political opinions of the Pope. There's a big effort, to define Catholicism according to, do you or do you not accept the political opinions of the Pope? If you don't, we're going to call you heterodox. And I think that's going on to a great extent right now.
So maybe if we can turn, as we wrap this up, to a practical question. So what is the sort of ordinary Orthodox Catholic to do? So maybe they've read your book, they've listened to us, they see and are aware of this unholy alliance, or what Vigano says, Archbishop Vigano, that the Vatican has become the Vatican branch of the deep state. Being aware of that, what are ordinary Catholics to do? Do you have any advice?
Well, I think, it's perfectly appropriate for the laity to push back against this left-wing clericalism and to call it out wherever it appears, and to really challenge the hierarchy to give it up. We want bread, not, we want doctrine, not left-wing clericalism. And we should demand that of the hierarchy in the church, and use whatever means are available to us to resist this sort of this left-wing hijacking of the church that's taking place before our very eyes. And it's going to take, I think, many more Viganos to do that. There has to, people have to be outspoken, and they have to be, very direct and honest about what's happening. And I think over the next 4 years, we are going to see a plethora of examples of left-wing clericalism, which the faithful should reject and resist. And I don't know how exactly, that resistance will manifest itself, but it's, obviously, Catholics are within their canonical rights to object to left-wing clericalism. We're obligated to obey authoritative teaching. We are not obligated to swallow the left-wing political opinions of the Pope. And that is the really, the Pope a few weeks ago, I think he gave a speech, or maybe it was around Christmas time. He told the Curia, the real problem in the church is division. That there's too much division in the church, and the problem isn't that there's a crisis in the church. The problem is that there's division in the church. Well, actually, that division in the church is healthy because it's a response to heterodox teaching and left-wing clericalism, and we need more of that, not less. That division is a sign that the faithful are not going to allow the church to be stolen by these left-wing clericalists.
And actually, I know I said we're winding up, but that question I think is something we maybe should address, because you've said it a few times. You've called it clericalism. Well, interestingly, hasn't Pope Francis many times in his pontificate say that he's against clericalism, that he blames clericalism, says clericalism is a bad thing, we're fighting against it. So that's interesting. How is it that he claims to be against clericalism, but you're saying that's actually the problem of his pontificate?
Yeah, it really defines, he's constantly abusing his authority. He's abusing it with respect to his subversive heterodoxy. That's an abuse of his authority. But then he's also abusing it with respect to his political dilettantism. Which takes him to, it's turned him into an advocate for amnesty and climate change and gun control and all these issues on which Catholics should be able to disagree reasonably. He takes he's basically saying that there's only one Catholic position on those questions, and that's really the source of the division in the church. And the faithful, I think, are correct to resist that kind of abuse of the church's authority, and to insist that the church apply her legitimate authority to the natural law issues in our politics, which that's where the church's voice should be heard, is on all those non-negotiable moral issues related to the natural moral law, which Joe Biden's administration systematically ripping up.
No, it's interesting. It reminds me that I see the same trend in other left-wing politicians. They usually get the most outraged against what they do themselves, right? So Al Gore, who has massive house that's got a massive carbon footprint, is out denouncing carbon emissions, and it is always a sort of interesting trend among the left that they are often outspoken against the thing they're doing themselves. So I guess before we do end, is there anything else you'd like to add for our viewers before we end?
No, I think you've covered it pretty well. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
No, thank you for joining us, and hopefully this gave our viewers a chance to get to know you a little bit beyond the books. Again, author of many articles and books over the years. Two really important ones for our viewers: The Political Pope came out in 2017, and then The Biden Deception, which it gives you the story of the Biden's move, secret or covert move, or plan to move towards socialism. So two books that really complement each other, I think, in many ways. So please take a look at those. So thank you for joining us. As always, if you've enjoyed this free content, please share it among your contacts so that we can get the word out. You can do your part to help us distribute either the audio podcast or the video. So thank you for your attention, and I will see you at our next weekly news roundup with Matt Gaspers, and hoping to bring you some future special interviews and reports. Thank you, and God bless you. Ite missa est, alleluia.